engage constituents, and to hold elected officials accountable. And one of our core issues at the state level is transparency in government. Why is a transparent government a good government? It's because we elect these officials into office. They represent us and they're answerable to us. How many times in recent years, especially during Brownback's term, did we think who would possibly submit this absurd bill to become law? Who influenced them to write it? And who actually crafted it? These questions are hard to answer because Kansas has one of the most secretive state governments in the nation. How secretive is it? According to investigative reporting by the Kansas City Star, here are a few ways. Legislators are not required to include their names on bills they sponsor. Legislators can strip a bill of language and introduce amendments that have nothing to do with the original bill in a practice called gut and go. Elected officials don't have to announce public meetings or take minutes of those meetings, which would record who attended and what topics were discussed. Administrative officials don't have to comply with the Kansas Open Records Act. These tactics appear to be used most often with bills about issues that majority of Kansans support in one way, but forces that be want legislators to write laws in the opposite way. Majority of Kansans support increasing electoral participation, equitable school funding, expanding Medicaid, and sensible gun legislation. And yet the leaders in our state house choose to put forth bills that undermine these. Could this secrecy be a reason why Kansas has one of the worst voter participation in the nation? Could this secrecy be a reason why teachers are fleeing the state in droves? Could this secrecy be a reason why our state has lost nearly $1 billion or over $1 billion in Medicaid money and stands to lose more? Could this secrecy be a reason why our college students now find on campus unattended, loaded, stolen guns in bathrooms? The answer has to be yes. And the reason has to be these unpopular bills lacked transparency during their legislative process. If we had known, we could have done something about it. This lack of openness undercuts our engagement. Democracy is fragile, and the only way it works is if we participate in it. But what if we're shut out? Then what do we do? This is why Mainstream Coalition and Indivisible Kansas City wanted to host tonight's community event. We have speakers who will touch on the lack of accessibility at our state house and our local government and prescribe actions we can take to try to remedy it. As we go through tonight's town hall, we're asking you to join in. On your chairs are the programs for this evening. At the top, you will find the event's hashtag #DarkKansas. Please use it when you share information on social media. You will also find postcards and pens. Please use them to write down thoughts as the speakers touch upon a subject that's important to you. These thoughts can be about transparency, the issue we're covering tonight, or the issue that's currently riveting the country and Kansas, gun legislation. At the bottom of the program, you'll find the names of legislators to whom you can address your cards. As you entered the room, you probably saw a table that's been set up where people can register to vote. We have found in recent months that in multiple House and Senate races across the country, every vote counts. Please register if you haven't already. And lastly, we ask for you to be involved in one more way. And that is by coming back in the future and bringing 2 friends with you. Staying motivated and engaged is more fun when you have a friend to keep you company. Now to keep our program moving. I am thoroughly delighted to introduce our moderator, Davis Hammond. Davis is president of Loud Light. He is known for turning a rundown building across the street from Westboro Baptist Church into the Rainbow House in Topeka. For presenting testimony, facts actually, before a federal commission against Kobach in his quest for illegal voting. And for giving us those amazing weekly recap videos of the Kansas legislature. Please welcome Davis Hammond.
All right, here we go. Can y'all hear me? All right. Wow, that was several rounds of applause. One of the funny things, whenever she said, what do you do whenever you're essentially locked out of the door? It would be historically accurate in Kansas to say that you take an axe and you break down the door, which has happened in the Statehouse before, about 100 years ago, whenever one party was locked out. So I'm going to kind of tell you that I never expected to be doing this kind of work that I do, trying to engage people in state and local government. It was sort of out of necessity whenever I realized how few people were participating. As was mentioned, I came here working on LGBT rights, and then I realized that a lot of the advocacy didn't matter because so few people were engaged. And so few people were engaged, so our legislators were just kind of doing whatever the hell they wanted in the Statehouse. And it is very secretive, it's very dark, and it's just lots of, good old boy politics going on in there. So one story that I'm going to share before I move along the program is my experience doing a Cora open records request in Kansas. A couple months ago, I had never done one, and as you may recall, the Brownback administration decided to raise the fee to hold an event in the Statehouse from $20 to $500. And I was one of the first people, because I had an event that I was working with a group coming up to get that call, and they were like, oh, do you want to pay your fee? I'm like, yeah, I'm ready. Can you take down my card number? They're like, yeah, then it'll be $500 now. And I was like, whoa, hold up. How did this happen? And they were like, oh, they just decided this is what it is. And I was like, well, who made the decision? They're like, oh, I don't know. I can try to transfer you up to my boss. So I go there, and I'm spending days trying to go up the chain of command. And then I finally get there, and then the Secretary of Administration, their secretary says, oh, why are you calling? I guess they're calling you back. And I was like, no, I need to talk to them. And they're like, I don't know, maybe they'll get back to you. So then I called the press, and sure enough, in 10 minutes, I magically got a call back from the Secretary of Admin herself. And she had this whole narrative of why they had to raise the fee, and it just really didn't make sense. The numbers didn't add up to me. So I decided to do a Cora request. It's something that I had never done. And this is what I'd say to you. Whenever you see people do interesting things or in the news, that can be you. You just got to go do it. It literally started by Googling, how do you make a Cora request? And then I found out that you have to find particularly what department you're trying to request it from. So it was, how do you make a Cora request from the Department of Administration of Kansas? And then I filled out their form, and I started calling some other friends who had done it. And a couple tips, if you do decide to make a Cora request, are that be as specific as possible. Every day the government is transmitting thousands of emails, and if you tell them specific hot words, I wouldn't ask about podium rentals and fee increases, and then between certain people. So I want to know who the Secretary of Admin was talking to, and the people directly below her and stuff. And so I made this request, and then I waited, and a couple weeks later, I got a return email from an attorney who said that will be $1,500. And then I was like, can you give me anything? And then the guy was, this is very nice of him, he didn't have to do this. The guy worked with me, and he gave me some direct communications and helped me pin it down. And I ended up getting 80 pages of documents. And when I read through them, I found out some pretty fascinating stuff, including the department arguing of how they didn't really know how to justify the fee increase either. I found them literally saying that they would charge groups like the Girl Scouts, but not lobbyists, this fee. I could not believe that they had directly said Girl Scouts. And I also found that whenever this story was coming out, they were taking talking points from Sean Sullivan, Brownback's budget director, which doesn't even make sense why he would be writing the talking points for the Department of Administration. So sure enough, as I emailed this to the Secretary of Admin, I was like, oh, well, when you said this didn't make sense to me. I never got a reply, but a couple weeks later, the decision was reversed to increase the fee. So anyone could have done this. This is about seeing a problem and trying to dig into it and trying to find the tools that you have to put pressure on them to do the right thing. Another request that hasn't been filled, unfortunately, which is very relevant to this, is a young woman, Megan Jones, has been trying to request the communication between the NRA and the Board of Regents and universities around campus carry, and has been denied the request and told that she'd have to pay these high fees. And now they actually told her that they will no longer respond to her emails until she pays at least $400. So on a positive note, though, the new Governor Coyer did just do an executive order, Executive Order 1805, which now says that any core request the first 100 pages they have to release to you for free. So that's a start. It's not everything, but it is a start. So with that story, I hope that encourages you to kind of step up and realize that you can do stuff in this battle. It all will probably start with just Googling something and pushing your way along. But I'm going to pass it along to Ed Peterson, who serves as the Vice President of the Board of Directors of Mainstream Coalition. He has years of experience in local government. As a Fairway City Councilman, he led city government to invest in infrastructure that resulted in the doubling of property values. As a Johnson County Commissioner representing the Northeast Johnson County District, he focused on environmental issues and was an advocate of improved local and state funding for public education. His work as an attorney in private practice provides him opportunities to present cases before state and local administrative agencies. Please welcome Ed Peterson.
Thank you. Is this working? It's not. Try it. There we go. Is that any better? Yes. It is. Okay, good. My task tonight is to talk to you about open meetings and open records in local government. And my experience, not only in the organizations mentioned in the introduction, but I have worked with a lot of cities and municipal governments throughout Johnson County, Wyandotte County as well. And my experience says that local government is like daytime compared to the darkness that we hear about in Topeka these days. And in general, I think that's true. Now, there are instances where local governments have presented obstacles for both open meetings and open records. But I think by and large, they work fairly well to provide their citizens with the information that the citizens request. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about the laws and how they're supposed to work. First, there's the open meetings law, and that basically requires that all meetings of a majority of the governing body first have published notice, they must have an agenda, and they must be open so that the public can attend and watch what is going on. And by and large, I would guess 98% of all matters that come before local governing boards are conducted in that fashion. There are some exceptions that allow the governing body to meet in executive session. That would be a private session that the public is not entitled to attend or witness. Some of those exceptions are, first of all, discussions that involve attorney-client privilege. So if they're receiving advice from their counsel, that can be private. Another exception is where land acquisition is being discussed. We want to give governing bodies the opportunity, if they're in the business of purchasing land for public use, to be able to have a fair chance to buy that at a fair price. Personnel matters, another exception. And that's largely motivated by not wanting to put as particular employees life and employment out there for the public to digest. And I think that's a fair exception. A couple that you don't see very often, but they do exist, are where the discussion would involve a corporate trade secret or financial data that's specific to a particular organization. And finally, in certain situations, not so much local government, but where student rights are involved or patient rights and privileges are involved, those types of discussions can be held in private executive sessions. Now, if an executive session is held and there is a decision to be made, then the governing body has to reconvene in a public session and follow all the procedures. If they're going to make a decision, they need to make a motion, discuss the motion, and have a vote. They can't make the decision in executive session and go home. And that's that. They do have to be out there in public where the public has a chance to see the decision made and how it was made. As to open records, you kind of got a glimpse of that. The open records law applies to local governments as well, and any citizen can file a request. Most local governments have either a form or particular standards that they want you to meet. They're usually not very complicated, but they require the citizen to narrow down to a reasonable, understandable request. In my experience, I've seen requests such as, I want all of the zoning decisions and all materials you've ever made about zoning so that I can review and find out whether you made a mistake. Now, 10 years worth of exercising that power as a city government, that's obviously not going to be accommodated. So the rules usually require, here's the matter that I'm interested in as a citizen, here's the information that I would like. I would like the emails, I'd like the correspondence, I'd like all the staff memoranda and so forth. And you have to, if you're making a request, there's a balancing act that you have to do between an overbroad request and one that's so narrow that you don't really get the information that you want and need. So you need to work at that, spend a little bit of time on it. But my experience, again, is that once that is filed, there is a reasonable effort made by local governments to make a good faith effort to comply with your request. And I think David's experience echoes mine that eventually the staff will work with the requester and say, here's what we have. Does this really get to what you're wanting? If this is going to be a big project, are you sure you want everything? Local governments like the state are able to charge a fee for both the staff time and for the copy expense. So my time is just about up. I want to just make two observations. I know we're going to get into this later. The problems that arise, in my experience, come from mostly from the attitude at the top of the organization. If the organization wants to comply, the staff will. And when you find an organization not complying, it's usually because the attitude at the top, they don't want to do it. We'll talk more about this later, and I'll turn it over back to David. Thank you.
So always email like it's being read in a deposition. So that's the important thing to remember here. Our next speaker is Ron Kiefover. Is that right? All right. Ron Kiefover is, you don't have to stand up yet. I saw an introduction for you. He is president of the Kansas Sunshine Coalition for Open Government, a statewide coalition that includes law professors, members of the news media, and citizens committed to promoting an open government. In 1981, Ron drafted and spearheaded the adoption of a statewide Supreme Court rule permitting cameras in the courtroom for the first time in state history. He also implemented video streaming and Supreme Court oral arguments. Please welcome Ron Kiefover.
Thank you very much, David. The Sunshine Coalition was founded in the year 2000. Originally was housed at Wichita State University, but Through the years, the organization has moved to Topeka, and specifically under my direction, or executive director passed on in 2014. I, meanwhile, had just retired from the Kansas Supreme Court's administrative office, where I was and did spend my time trying to open state courts as much as possible over the years. And I did write the camera rule, and we did implement video streaming of Supreme Court arguments in 2012. And there's legislation pending right now that would do the same thing at the committee rooms at the Statehouse during legislative session, which is, as you all probably know, is where the action really happens. It's not so much on the House floor as it is in the committee rooms. The coalition, I want to give you a little background on what we do, but right now our focus is on legislation. There are a number of transparency bills. That was all hooray for transparency at the beginning of the session, and the bills are kind of getting bogged down. But there are some important bills out there that will shed light on a dark state. One of those, or three of those bills, have to do with release of body cam footage, police videos. We had a horrific time in Topeka in which a fellow was shot during some kind of a disruption at a local park by two police officers and killed. But the family could not view the video per current state law for 11 weeks. And even then, it required them to go to court, get a guardian ad litem appointed, through all of that. And I've heard varying amounts of $1,500 to $3,000 just so that the father of the deceased could see the last moments of his son's life. That contrasts, if you may recall, a swatting incident in Wichita where the Wichita Police Department released video of the shooting, fatal shooting of an innocent person who was a victim of a so-called swatting prank within 17 hours. And so that just demonstrates to the coalition and to anybody that's paying attention that the law on video cams or police videos need to be uniform across the state so that all the departments will be following the same plan. Well, the three bills were introduced. Tremendous opposition by various and sundry law enforcement agencies across the state. So we have agreed to a compromise. We now have a bill that's probably has traction that could pass, that allows the family of a victim or shooting victim or someone killed in a police incident to at least see that within 30 days or 20 days, of the fatality. Meanwhile, the rest of the bill that would open it to the public and for others to be able to see what is going on in the police department, it will be referred to a committee called the Judicial Council for study this summer. And the coalition will be there. You can count on that. Very quickly, there is a bill that would video stream from committee rooms. I'm not sure where we are, maybe Representative.
Passed out of Fed and State this morning, is now in general orders.
Okay, passed out of the Federal and State Affairs Committee, is now in general orders. I was asked to comment on a success. One of the successful areas the coalition has experienced has to do with the affidavits that are used to support arrest and search warrants. That for 35 years they remained secret, and through, you probably all are aware of the Representative Rubin's bill that resulted from a police raid, an unfounded police raid on a Shawnee family's home. Any event, through that incident, through the support of the coalition, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters and the Kansas Press Association, we now have a bill or an act that opens those affidavits for public inspection. Before that, as a citizen, we had no idea why somebody was being arrested for whatever it was, because under the existing state law, those records are closed. As Ed described, there are really a lot of nuances with open records and open meetings, and the Sunshine Coalition, one of the things we do is try to help people work through some of those nuances. And very quickly, I have 1 minute. There's a lady in Independence, Kansas, named Debbie Miller, who is one of those watchdogs and who attends her city council meetings. And when they were hiring a new city administrator, she by gum wanted to know on what basis they were interviewing candidates. And she asked to see a blank form that anybody applying for a job would have filled out for that position, and was denied as a personnel record counsel. But she contacted us. We through council made a formal request, was denied. And the city council was also charging for every Cora request a $25 computer maintenance fee, which is totally contrary to Cora. In any event, she filed on her behalf a complaint with the State Attorney General's office, which resulted in, yes, she can see the blank form, and secondly, you can't charge $25 computer maintenance fee for Cora requests, and third, you violated the Kansas Open Records Act, and there's a $250 fine, and under amendments to Cora and COMA, the Attorney General's office now, whenever there's a consent order, posts it on the internet. So you can go to the AG site and read all about the Debbie Miller from Independence, Kansas, on really what I would call the wall of shame. So with that, I will pass the mic back to our moderator.
Thank you. All right, next we have Stephanie Clayton, who probably around here doesn't need an introduction, but she is currently serving her third term as the Kansas State representative for the 19th District, a longtime champion for transparency and accountability. She has sponsored and advocated for numerous pieces of legislation in the State House, such as expanding audio and video live streaming, increasing access to public records, and informing the public on which parties or interests sponsor bills. She regularly live tweets her votes. By the way, sitting next to her, tweeting and texting, her thumb is just like, pew! And works in the House, making her one of the most transparent legislators in Topeka. You can find her Twitter handle on the program. Please welcome Representative Stephanie Clayton.
Thank you, Davis, and I want to thank Paffy and Lisa and Brandy for all of the work that went into this, putting this together. This is wonderful, and it's wonderful to see such a large crowd of people who have turned out who share and echo our concerns regarding transparency in government. I don't even know where to begin. I drove up here from Topeka, where I sat in the Social Services Budget Committee, and I had some questions about some positions, about what the return on investment was. We're spending about $800,000 on about 7 different positions that were involved with the faith-based community initiatives underneath the Department of Children and Families budget. So I asked questions such as, what exactly do these people do? And it was difficult to get an answer regarding that. I asked what sort of return on investment we have, how many families have been helped. I was unable to get that. I made a motion to move the money from those programs and put in extra caseworkers and was excoriated for doing that. And I made a request to the legislative post-audit to have an audit on these programs. Now, in order to do that, the way that our system is currently set up, we have a legislative post-audit committee. This post-audit committee is not elected by the people, it's not elected by you, it is appointed by the Speaker and by the Senate President. And so it remains to be seen whether permission will be granted to have this audit. So that's what I did this afternoon. That's the most recent. Some of the experiences that I've had as a legislator, I think a lot of us, when we first get elected, my naivete as a freshman was typical, but as I look back, I'm just, ugh. But some of the things that I noticed when I went in was just a general attitude of almost sort of a don't ask, don't tell sort of thing. Now, I had started off in my activism as one who live tweeted meetings. I would come to city council meetings and live tweet those. I would live tweet Shawnee Mission School District meetings. Any sort of political meeting that I saw, I would just give the play-by-play. And so I thought, logically, after I got elected, oh, well, I'll just tell everyone how I vote on everything and tell them what's going on and just sort of continue on with my activism as an elected official and stay the same as I did as an activist. As a result, this did earn me some, a lot of sideways glances, a lot of, people moving over and not wanting to sit next to me. And I can't say that I blame them, because in the legislature, a good 85% of the votes that we cast are never seen by you. Ever. You're not going to know what they are. Our voting record for the session released up until turnaround, which was the first major deadline when we have to work all of our bills through the House of Origin, that was all placed on our desks. And I looked and I compared it to my own Twitter feed and I thought, well, boy, this is kind of skinny. But we have seen some attempts by other legislators, and one thing I will say is that transparency is an issue that transcends all ideology. Some of my most conservative colleagues, although a lot of them are no longer in the legislature, but some of my most conservative colleagues were strong advocates of transparency. Some of my most liberal colleagues are strong advocates, and of course we've got several moderates who are advocates for that as well. But sprinkled in between, within all of these various ideologies, are people who do not want you to know what they're doing. It's an arrogant statement on my part, but I tell you all of my votes because my votes are all awesome and you should all know about it. I'm so excited to tell you what I do. But as it stands, and oftentimes I'll have constituents ask me, well, how did so-and-so vote? Or why did somebody do this? Or why did somebody do that? And I say, well, I have to draw the line because I am a legislator and I am not a journalist. And also I would like to survive, whatever remainder of terms I serve. So one thing that I began working on with colleagues was legislation to bring forth transparency. The first bill that we put together in 2014 had, again, some of the most conservative legislative sponsors that you could ever find, and some from the far left as well. And that was to bring audio and video streaming completely and totally to the Statehouse, all of our committee rooms, as well as for floor proceedings. Maybe I may or may not have been inspired by what I saw in the Supreme Court. Might have copied from that just a little bit, but hey, all good ideas need to be spread. And I think that it is so important for us to have not only video but audio live streaming in our committee rooms, because that is where a lot of our unrecorded votes take place, and oftentimes these votes are silent. We have voice votes where we say aye and nay, but when we take our division votes, when the chair is unsure, when we have a close vote, we raise our hands. And so on the audio stream, which is a wonderful start, you can't hear who's raising their hands. And so that is a difficulty. In the House, when we have a division vote, again, when the chair is unsure if the ayes or the nays have it, we press our buttons and the board lights up. There's a large electronic board, for those of you who've never been there, that our names light up either red if we are a no and green if we're a yes. But unless that vote is what is called a roll call vote, you never see that. And if any of us were to take a picture of the board, if I did that as a legislator, or if you did that as a visitor in the gallery, you would be, if you were caught doing so, you'd be asked to be removed from the gallery. And as a legislator, I could be subject to censure for doing that. So this is why we pursue legislation that sort of puts us on our best behavior. And I firmly think, although I've got about 1 minute left, there are several different ways you can put this into place. You could put it into place through a policy change, but a policy is only as good as the individuals who implement it. You could put it into a rules change, but those rules can change every biennium, and again, are only as solid as the rules chair who enforces them. Or you can put it into statutory change, which is in the law books. And I have found that pursuing statutory change in regards to transparency is the most solid and most effective method because, again, it compels us to do what we should be doing in the first place. But I think I have a lot of wonderful colleagues in the legislature who do supply that information out, who do push that out. I know that many of you have wonderful communications with them. But, the rest of us, sometimes we just need a little bit of a nudge, and so that's what I'm set out to do. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak, and I look forward to your questions.
I just want to add something really quick to that. So for y'all who don't know, I run around the State House with a camera over my shoulder and post up in committee rooms. And last year, I was regularly told that I would have to shut off my camera every time they started taking votes on that so that I couldn't record their hands. This year, again, magically no one's saying anything to me. So that's why it's important to be at events like this, to show up, to put this pressure on, because in the State House there is a different vibe where they understand that they are being scrutinized and that they can't keep this path of being so dark. So we're going to go into a couple questions. I have a couple questions for them first, and then we're going to open it up to everyone, so start thinking about what you would like to ask. The first question is for Ed. What's the biggest barrier to transparency you think in local government?
Well, as I mentioned in my comments, attitude at the top is probably the single thing that's most important, and that means you have to elect officials who are committed to transparent operations. But I think beyond that, especially when you get at the local level, I think there's a significant issue with resources. A lot of cities here in Johnson County are wrestling with whether to go live streaming. There's an expense associated with that. You have to buy the equipment. You have to have somebody operate the equipment. And if only a dozen people are interested in a particular meeting, does it warrant making that kind of an investment in the resources? And I think finally, the interest of constituents is another barrier that there are just a lot of meetings in local government that nobody shows up for. They don't know whether there's an important issue, or there's not an interest in that level of government, or for whatever reason, people just don't show up. And I think if that goes on after a period of time, then a laziness sets in, or carelessness maybe would be a better word, where bad habits begin to develop. And that becomes a pattern that's easy to follow. It's easier to make sloppy decisions and not notice things up and go ahead, well, it's okay, nobody's here, nobody cares, just go ahead and act, even though they know they're not following the proper procedure. So I would list those as the prominent reasons that get in the way of transparency here in Johnson County and local government.
Thank you, Ed. All right, so my next question that was written here down for me, for Ron, was already kind of answered, which is about core requests. So if you want to elaborate on that some, but I'll just take my liberties here to ask you, why did you get involved in this and start pushing these issues?
I personally am involved because people fear and mistrust the unknown. And, sunshine is the strongest antiseptic for that. And I didn't say that originally. That was a quotation from the late Chief Justice Robert H. Miller in one of the Supreme Court's opinions on open government. But you mentioned one of the biggest hamstrings with CORA and COMA, or open records and open meetings. It's the lack of information, in my experience, by public officials in most of the cases. Most of the violations are innocent. Gee, I didn't know we had to go do a formal motion to go into executive session. So the Sunshine Coalition has, for the last 12 years, been putting on regional CORA and COMA trainings for general public officials, news media across the state. We do 5 to 6 regional trainings, and we've done every year in Johnson County, Kansas City, Kansas, in Johnson County Public Library, not too many years back, and so on. So we think public education information of the citizenry and public officials about these two statutes is vital. The other thing that's going on right now that we're working on, and this is in conjunction with the State Attorney General's office, by the way. And the other thing, the Attorney General's office has now a 12-member committee on online training for open records and open meetings laws. We are developing videos that will be posted. In fact, we've already had a rough draft of our first video developed by Channel 12 in Wichita, permitting actually the news media to write the script or help write the script and do the production of video. But these videos will be online and be easily accessible for people who have no clue about how to make a core request or what their rights are under COMA. So I'm really excited about that. And the first video that was produced and professionally done by KTWCH in Wichita will be ideally doing the rest of those. The other use of those videos, though, are going to be a little test that will be at the end of each video that's optional for the viewer to do, unless you are a public official who has been determined to have violated CORA or COMA, and you'll have to evidence that you watched that video by completing the test following that thing. So there is a prospect of more sunshine in Kansas, despite all the doom and gloom that we're all now experiencing.
All right, thank you, Ron. Which actually leads perfectly into my next question for Representative Clayton. There has been an unofficial KS Ledge Twitter account that for the last 3 years has tweeted every single day, "The sun is shining in Kansas and don't let anyone tell you any different." With Brownback gone and with the great investigative reporting by the KC Star, will we see more sun shining on the Kansas Statehouse, Representative Clayton?
Thank you, Davis. Yeah, I see that every day. I'm like, oh, that's great. Who knew? But I think that we are seeing some good moves towards transparency. I think some of the moves made by the executive branch, clearing some issues up regarding DCF and some of the other, just some of the other main state agencies, the reduction in charges for CORA requests, things of that nature, I am happy to see, because for so long in the legislature, it has been incredibly terrible. But does that mean that I'm going to stop pushing? Well, no, it certainly does not. And I think that you, as constituents, this is, above all, one thing that you all need to remember is that this is your government. You are paying for it, whether you want to or not. And so since we are essentially taking money from you to finance our workings, then you should demand and expect a government that fully communicates to you all that we do and that is open with you. So I would say that I expect to have constituents keep at me, and whether you live in my district or not, call me, tweet at me, email me, ask me to continue pursuing these. And the same with other legislators, because if we drop off and say, oh, okay, everything's all transparent, now we're done, then things tend to creep back. So one thing I've noticed is that government is not unlike a room full of toddlers. If you turn your back on it, well, you all know what happens. So I would urge your pursuit in these matters, and don't let up on us.
Thank you. All right, we're going to go ahead and open up the floor. So I think we have a couple of folks with mics running around. They're going to run up to you, and you can just direct it at any speaker, or just do an open question, and one of the speakers will step up to answer it.
My name is Sue Storm. This question is for Ed, I think. Ed, for organizations like the County Commission, city government, school boards, I wasn't too aware of this until I was on the State Board of Education, but doing the minutes of an organization. Some boards do what they call skinny minutes, that just tell the votes that were taken, what the vote was. They do not say, Mr. Jones asked so-and-so and so-and-so. Mr. Peterson replied that, da-da-da-da-da. It just records the votes. And when I was on the State Board of Education, that we moved in that direction, and I think Shawnee Mission does skinny minutes, that there are people who want every, even board members who are on the board, who want every pearl that comes out of their mouth to be in the minutes. And so, what is that a transparency issue, you think? And what's the best policy there?
Well, I think what all that's required of the minutes, and Ron may have a better handle on this than I, is simply the motion, an accurate statement of the motion, and a recording of the vote. At the county commission, we had the additional step, and Jason, I assume we still do this, have transcripts of the meeting. So everything is recorded, and that recording is reduced into a written format. So you, if you're so interested, can go and find a complete text of the meeting. This gets into the resource issue, though. There aren't many local governments that really have the resources for that kind of detailed recording. And to my knowledge, it's probably something that the citizenry of that governing body needs to demand or request. I don't think the law has specific requirements as to what has to go into the minutes, other than the actual motion and the vote on the motion.
I think different parliamentary procedure books give different guidelines. We always used to use Roberts, now there are others. But at the state board, it was recorded, and you could tell where on the tape it was, so that somebody who wanted to find the discussion about a certain issue, they really wanted to, could come in and somebody would help them do that, and they'd find it and they could listen to it. But I don't know that there was a written transcript. I mean, a day and a half meeting was a long time.
Yeah. Well, and the county commission transcripts were quite lengthy, and but they were available for people. Again, I think it's a matter of, in part, balancing the need to know versus the cost of getting that information out there. Probably 80 to 90% of the local government votes are routine. There's no controversy. There's a matter in front of them, it's explained by the staff, and the vote's up or down. And that's about all there is to it, And so, for the more controversial matters, that's when the transcript or the more detailed minutes are needed.
So you think that minutes could be, I'm sorry, we're going to do a follow-up.
Can we come back to you?
Sure.
Thank you. So can you ask?
Yes, I have a question. Hi, I have a question for Representative Clayton. My big concern, I've done a lot of research with the bills from the past, and I think the Kansas City Star reported 94% of the bills during the Brownback era they were ALEC bills. And most Kansans don't even know who ALEC is. And my contention is the number one problem in the Kansas legislature is the ALEC gators. And to me, if that's not solved, the transparency issue, what is being done? Is there anywhere we can go to see? I know there's been 25. They're all bad bills. The gun bills, those are all ALEC bills written in secret with legislators. Is there anywhere we can go and see those bills where they say ALEC?
All right, well, for those of you who are not familiar with ALEC, that stands for the American Legislative Exchange Council. It is a national group of state legislators, and I belong to a couple of national groups of state legislators. I belong to NCSL, which is the National Council of State Legislators. Now with NCSL and Women in Government, those two organizations in which I participate, we meet, we hear various panels, and then we leave. We are not set together to craft model legislation or boilerplate legislation, and nor are we handed it and sent off to go ahead and put this forth in Kansas. But when he talks about ALEC, that is essentially how their structure is and what happens. They're often handed boilerplate legislation. In some cases, sometimes bills have been introduced in other states where they forgot to take off the ALEC part, and it was like, oh, whoops, because you're supposed to copy, paste, and make it look like your own. Now, regarding stopping ALEC legislation, I think that we have to, and one of my co-sponsors is actually in the room, Representative Jerry Stogstall. 1/3 of the House has co-sponsored legislation, a House bill, and there is a Senate bill that mirrors this, that would essentially, whenever someone introduces a bill in committee, whether that is a legislator, whether that is a state agency requesting that the committee hear this bill, because state agencies can do that, whether a citizen requests that, although usually a citizen requests a bill and they ask a legislator to draft that for them, so that's how that works. But if passed, this bill would engrave it in statute so that the person who requests the bill would be listed as the requestor, and then on behalf of would have to be listed. Now, it was said earlier this session that that was changed, and that leadership said that, oh no, we're already doing that, and now all of the bill requestors are already listed. But I challenge you, go look up, if any of you have on your phones right now, go look up in House, Fed, and State, look up the Kansas Transparency Act. That does not have a requestor listed. So the irony is, and yet here we are. Regarding ALEC, the House voted on a bill regarding asbestos claims for victims of any sort of asbestos-related cancer, and whether they could put claims against companies for that or not. And I ended up, I read the bill, as one does, hopefully, and looked at the testimony and listened to the speeches of my fellow colleagues on the floor and thought, this doesn't look too good to me. I'm not going to be putting a yes on it. Found out yesterday that bill was an ALEC bill. I had no idea. Aside from the fact that I guess that my gut knows when a bill is an ALEC bill and when it's not, but even throughout the committee process. So I think in some cases it's really, really easy for legislators to hide where they got the source for this legislation. So again, I think that compelling legislators through statute to say who introduced a bill and who sponsored a bill, I think that will help matters. But I also know that oftentimes if you give someone a loophole, they will find a way through it and they will find a way around it. So we just have to keep trying. Thank you.
I also have a question for Representative Clayton. I'm your constituent also, so this is a question from the district. So I thank you for everything you're doing in transparency. I think it's super important, and there are obviously some low-hanging fruit that needs to be worked on. My question also is, and I want to just get your thoughts on it, is there's this troubling pattern in Topeka where we don't do anything for 2 or 3 months and then we jam everything through really quickly. And it doesn't make any news. I read Representative Stogstall's letter this morning, and I've worked with him on several things, where it doesn't make any news when the Education Committee is canceled, or Commerce is canceled, or doesn't meet for a week. But what are some ideas to help expose when the political process seems to be shut down, or it's maybe things are happening with leadership, for instance, to prevent the bill from even being worked in committee so that it can't possibly get to the floor and it can't possibly make any news and people can't get angry about it. What are some ways that we can get into the real nuts and bolts of the legislative process to see the things that would pass if they got to committee, that would pass if they made it to the floor? How do you shine a light on that?
I think one of the most important ways that you can shine a light on that, we have really 2 ways. Number one, legislatively, if we set our rules to a certain degree where if any changes to committee meetings that are made, there needs to be, say, 24 or 48 hours notice. How many of you have signed up to provide testimony on a bill or who've wanted to be present in the room when a bill was worked? That's even harder to find out because on every single agenda it says possible action on bills previously heard, and you don't know which ones they are. I've walked into committee not knowing which bills are going to be worked, and I'm on the committee. So bless you. And so I think that one of the things that we can do is, again, set hard requirements for notice regarding hearings. I think that helps. But another way to shine a light on this, honestly, is buy a subscription to your local newspaper. Buy several. Buy one of the Shawnee Mission Post. Get one of the Kansas City Star, because if we allow media to die, then there is no one to cover. And so I think that, yes, as legislators, we can put out as much information as we can, but oftentimes, so I sit on 3 committees, and the aforementioned ALEC bill came out of the Judiciary Committee. So I don't sit on that committee, had no idea. A lot of times you don't know what's coming until you see it on your list of bills to be heard on the committee of the whole the next morning. And so, I'm usually staying up, doing my research, trying to figure out what it is we're going to be looking at. But I think you ask your legislators to keep track, but honestly, support your media, because that's how we're going to get more about the stories as to why we haven't taken any action and why probably most of the action regarding the education bill will take place in the first week of April. I just have a sinking feeling in that regard. So I hope that that was helpful, and thank you for coming. It was nice to meet you. Sorry to give special preferential treatment to constituents.
I would like to just echo what you said about the news media. Contact them. They're not, they're not snakes. You wouldn't be a snake handler. Call them up, or a lot of times, if you are a print subscriber, it'll have their email address with their articles. So that's one way to shine light is through the media.
I'm going to ask Mary. I'm guessing.
Yeah, it was kind of cutting out.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah.
I would like to ask Representative Clayton a question, only because I think you might have the easiest answer.
Okay.
I was reading online somewhere that many of the federal buildings do not allow open carry or concealed weapons. I'm curious to know, when you're in session, do people go through metal detectors? Are you allowed to have guns when you're in session?
Yep. I mean, please don't, but yes, you are allowed. Legislators and staff members, when we go in, we have an electronic badge that we can use to go in any door. We bypass the metal detectors, and so legislators and staff and any some lobbyists have been able to carry concealed in the Capitol since, I think, 2016, 2017. So and I know if someone does go through, like a citizen who wants to conceal carry in the Capitol, they will go through the metal detector, and I think that they would be stopped by security just like, hey, why do you want to bring that in there? I have not heard of anyone saying, all right, well, but this is my right to conceal and carry. But, technically, yes, you're allowed to conceal and carry there. You're allowed to conceal and carry here. You might have, again, please don't, but, you've seen the sign that says no open carry. Although, frankly, in the interest of transparency, I firmly prefer open carry because at least I know you have a gun and then I can get away. So, but I hope that answered your question. Davis?
I'm going to add a quick thing to that. I got a built-in mic here.
Oh, yeah, you're good.
So there is one thing you can't bring into the Capitol, and that's a political sign. So I literally watched someone go through with a gun, and then I watched a young woman who had a sign that said woke feminist, and they said, ma'am, I'm going to have to confiscate that. Because sticks are dangerous.
It's okay. I'm totally fine with all of the woke feminists, so by all means, continue coming in.
Hi, this question. Oh, sorry.
Why don't I use the mic because I don't have a lot of voice?
Yeah.
No, yeah, use the mic.
Use the mic.
Use the mic.
Use the mic.
This question is for Representative Clayton and Davis as well, because you Seriously, look at what happened in Parkland. A bunch of 18-year-olds came together and a lot of things happened. So my thing is when I look at it, how content we see gets delivered to us is totally different than what you see in a newspaper. And so while it's great necessarily to subscribe to the newspaper, and while I love politics, so I read it, how do we connect, as younger people you go out there, how do you think we can best connect with those that aren't in this room right now, so that way we can increase transparency?
Well, I think, and that is an excellent question, and I really appreciate you taking the time to ask it. So I think one of the best ways, and just I want to expand a little bit on what I said earlier about subscribing to newspapers, because oftentimes the media will be there when they can be there, and they will be live tweeting proceedings from the floor when we're having a very interesting debate or when we're there all day. But if you don't pay to subscribe to the newspaper, they can't have their people in there communicating using various media. So that's part of it, is just you have to get the bodies in there. Oh, that sounds terrible when I say that. But you know, and you have other folks like Davis who have their own media companies. But again, I have no idea how you fund, but you must do it somehow.
I don't know either.
So, but this is donations, whether it is to what we would think of as traditional print media. I think that traditional print media is well aware of the fact that they had better evolve. But I also think that if you find not so traditional sources that might need funding, that's a way. One thing that I have found is that transparency is incredibly expensive. Whether you are trying to pay staff to provide adequate minutes, whether you're paying for equipment for live streaming, whether you're trying to get people who are not with the government telling you what's going on with the government. Because again, I'm telling you everything that I'm doing, but you should take what I say with a grain of salt too, because I'm an elected official, so I'm going to be talking with my own bias, right? So I think looking at these various sources and finding a way to fund them, and also, I'm somewhat remiss because I use Twitter, and my daughter has expressly told me that Twitter is for old people, and so and I mean she's right, she's 13, and so but listening to them, she's 13 now, but in just a couple of years she's going to be our new young voter, and so I think listening to that and finding better mediums is that's incumbent upon us. But as far as constituents are concerned and as far as citizens are concerned, I would say find ways to support any sort of media source. But I hope that I can answer your question. Here's Davis. He's probably got better.
No, that's great. That's great. So a lot of this, I think, is a problem that starts at early education. So civics classes isn't really a thing anymore. I actually came across a 1940s Kansas civics textbook, and I was shocked because it reads like a community organizer guide these days. This whole narrative of what it means to be an engaged citizen has really fallen out. I mean, American government is not a civics class. Understanding even the structures, that's not the same as learning civics. What does it mean to be a good member of your community? So reintegrating that as part of the basic curriculum in Kansas would be a good first start. I think a huge reason of why I love this stuff so much is because I'm lucky enough that I had parents who would check me out of school on election day and take me to vote with them, and then take me to lunch and explain, this is why we do this. This is what it means to be a member of this community and to step up and do this thing and to work through it. And they would sit with me and talk to me about presidential candidates and things like that. These are cultural norms that we have to rebuild here of what it means to participate. And then being more innovative on these things too. The videos that I did, the first week I did the video last year of the first week of session, I was like, I cannot make this more than 4 minutes. And I think the first one was 3 minutes. And I went and I asked one of my best friends, I went over after and I was like, hey, did you see my video? I was like, yeah, it was great. And I was like, oh, what did you think of this? And he was like, oh, I don't know. And then he was like, yeah, I stopped watching after a minute and a half. I was like, oh no. But making it really quick and making things that pique curiosity. I mean, it's something that I'm even trying to think through of how to be more creative with engaging people. But it really takes all of us, and it takes putting it in language that people understand. I work on college campuses. regularly people say, they're like, why would I even care? Because I'll be talking about a state representative race. And I'm like, oh, did you know like the state representative votes on your school's funding, which decides how much your tuition is, which decides how much debt you're in. Like the rest of your life, you're going to be making a debt payment that's being decided by your state representative that in a lot of races around Johnson County are won by less than 1,000 votes. And all of a sudden that's a different narrative. It's an empowering narrative. So we really need to be focused on empowering young people to be leaders, to step up into these roles and to know they can actually control these things. That government isn't another object. Like government is you. These institutions are just people, and you can be a part of them.
I'll follow up with a plug for Main Street here. We have obtained a grant, and we're dealing specifically with the issue of voter engagement through the grant. And it's a very difficult challenge because what we're going to try to do is reach the communities that are either marginally involved or not involved at all. They tend to be low-income, minority, immigrant communities. And the challenge of bringing those people in and stimulating an interest, first of all, convincing them that they have a stake and they can make a difference. Most of them have been told through countless encounters with the rest of the world here that they don't matter. And so we have to educate them and encourage them and empower them. But we're attempting to do that, and we hope by the end of this election year, we will have at least some data to show what we did that worked, what didn't work, and hopefully we will have made a difference and reached some of those people.
I don't know who this would be to, so you guys can just jump at it. So we talked about visibility of the government officials and votes, debate, transcripts and things. What about secret money? What's the status of money in Kansas politics, and is there any progress on that front?
Yeah, we do.
Other than the mayor of Edgerton, I don't think there's any money. Well, you know, there is a campaign finance law, and in again, this is kind of my experience of local government, we're capped at raising $500 per individual donor per election cycle. And also, I think the big donors don't usually pay much attention to local races. They're going to focus their resources on the state where maybe they've got more opportunity to gain from their contribution. So I haven't seen finance at the local level in Kansas being a major issue. And we do have campaign finance rules that apply to the state races as well, and I know Stephanie can speak to the specifics of that. But I think when you get to the state level, you begin to run into the dark money and the PACs who can come in and spend money without reference to who they raise the money from. And then as long as they're independent of the candidate, they can spend, it's an unlimited expenditure and unlimited contributions to those organizations. So I think we are seeing issues at the state level that relate to that. That's really, I think that's going to be that's going to require a federal solution because that's where most of that activity occurs. Stephanie, you want to add, Ron? It is a serious problem.
Yeah, I think we've all got something to say on this.
Well, I was just going to say there's a faint ray of sunshine on the horizon in that area. There is a bill that's working its way through the legislature, and I think I'm optimistic in its enactment, but that would require lobbyists for the executive and judicial branches to register just as lobbyists already do at the legislative branch. You know, just kind of, why didn't we think of this, 50 years ago? But coming from the judiciary, for example, I know they let contracts with millions and millions of IT money for the state courts across the state. You know, who lobbied to get that? How did that work? So that bill is in the legislature this session, and that should help at least find out who's lobbying executive and judiciary.
All right, well, I'll just speak a little bit to dark money and the way that it's used in state campaigns, and I can speak from experience. When I was running for re-election in 2014, every day I would, knock on doors. I tried to do about 150. Sorry, those of you in the room who I harassed, gotta go see you. And so I would come back and open my mailbox, and the only thing that I would know for sure would be the postcards that my campaign paid for. And so that's an interesting situation because you have 4 different variables. You have what the candidate paid for, you have what the candidate's opponent paid for, you have what the dark money who likes the opponent paid for, and you have what the dark money who likes the candidate paid for. So I would sit there and I'd be like, oh, look, there's that mailing that I approved. That came in. Oh, yikes, yeah, that's really mean and I don't like it. Okay, it's from my opponent, so whatever. And then there would be the dark money variables where it would be like, I had no idea this was coming. Okay, it's nice. Fair enough, but I had no idea that what it would say, who it was from, and what it was or how it worked. And so you have dark money on both sides of the issue, so I will definitely say that. And that the candidate is really only aware of and responsible for whatever has their paid for by at the bottom. So that's kind of how that works. Just so many mysteries and so many variables. And I still have nightmares about my mailbox, by the way. So it's, but yeah, and a lot of you are probably, might have even been seeing that either, for instance, during legislative session, you might get something and it might not say vote for or vote against someone, but it might say, call your representative and tell them to stop taking all of your money through taxes. And it might not say it in that voice, but that's how I always read it. And so when you get that, now that is educational. So that is from what we would call a 501c4. The difference between a C4 and a C3 is that a C3, donations to that are made public, and those can say vote for this person or vote against this person. But a C4 is educational, so your representative is a terrible person, and this is why. You don't know who those donors are. Those are secrets. So, but they can't say vote for or vote against. So does that make sense? So that's kind of how that all works. Mostly, if it doesn't have the paid for by in a candidate's name, maybe don't believe it, even if it's nice. So that's probably the best way that you should go about things, because otherwise that's outside messaging, trying to get in your head, and we don't need any more of that than we already have. Davis?
Thank you. Wow. So I spend actually a lot of time thinking about this, and it's pretty amazing the magic you can do with accounting. And I could right now actually legally take probably about $20,000 or $30,000 from you to a state representative, and I could tell you a way to magically make it legally get into their accounted fund. There's very sketchy things that is technically money laundering, but technically legal that you can do. And that's just like, this is the actually like still legal stuff. This isn't even the dark money stuff. There's a lot of sketchy things you can do because the reality is it's a big money thing. So there's a lot of very smart people every day thinking, how do I get your money into my account in a legal fashion, who are just reading through, who are finding that misplaced comma that opens up a legal loophole for them to funnel money a certain way. But with dark money, as you may know, Citizens United, whenever that opened up the floodgate, part of the problem is that much of it can't be fixed until that's overturned and changed. There are potentially some laws we could do, like making it try to increase the disclosure laws of what has to be listed in ads and things like that. As you know, whenever you get those millions of dollars of ads that pop up the week before the campaign, we can try to release that. But as far as dark money goes, until the Supreme Court is able to overturn that, that's kind of a reality of our politics. I mean, it's why every election cycle billions of dollars are poured in. But on this too, going back to how to motivate people. When people tell me voting doesn't matter, I'm like, why do you think people are spending billions of dollars to try to change a couple votes in a district if it doesn't matter? So yeah, we need to overturn the Supreme Court stuff. There's some local things we can do to change the law, but it's, I mean, that is a broader topic that I wouldn't have time to get into if I had an hour right now. But again, it's something to put pressure on. It's something to really try to meet with your representatives about and talk to them about. Because everyone will say, yeah, dark money's bad. Well, they're also literally having private meetings with dark money dealers to coordinate how it's going to go in. So it's a huge issue. It's at every level, from the Supreme Court to your city council. And although they don't often get into local things, there are plenty of times where a bunch of dark money will flow into city council races. We've had Americans for Prosperity get involved in Topeka city council races. So it happens everywhere. It's a problem on every aspect of the law.
So we have time for one last question. Is there... Okay, we have one.
Okay, thank you. This is for Representative Clayton. Just a little background. I've been to a couple other town halls on government transparency, and you were a panelist at one of them. And I don't remember which one it was, but there was a topic brought up in one of them that just dumbfounded me and the other people at the town hall. And that was a procedure in the legislature called gut and go. And when we heard that, we were like, unbelievable. That really happens? And I think all of us in the room thought, well, that has to end. That's terrible. It has to end. And it sounded easy, just don't do it, don't allow it. But I saw some follow-up conversation or some writing somewhere in maybe the paper that said, well, it's not so easy. The government needs that to survive, to make things happen. If that's not there, we can't make it work, or some version of it. So now I'm wondering, what is the current status of that procedure to be able to do that?
All right, so I'm going to go back a little bit and I'm going to explain to you how gut and go works. So first of all, I have to tell you what it is, because legislators are currently disputing exactly what is and what is not a gut and go. When I wrote the legislation that would, again, compel legislators, requestors, and requested on behalf of, one of the caveats that I put in that bill is that in the event of a gut and go, that would not only strike all of the material after the enacting clause, but it would also strike the names of the sponsors and requesters. Because remember when I spoke earlier about naive freshman Stephanie, one of the pieces of advice that I was given was never, ever, 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 ever put your name on a bill, ever. Because it could get gutted, and then your nice bill about transparency becomes like a bill like enhancing puppy mills or something horrible like that. You just don't, you know. So that's what I was told. Never put your name on anything because the gut and go might happen. So interesting how the gut and go sort of enables and perpetuates that lack of transparency. But then, as you mentioned, you have a lot of legislators saying, well, gosh, we really need this tool because how else do we do good things? So you have examples of good legislation that I was proud to vote for and that I do support that was put into place by the gut and go, such as Medicaid expansion. Totally support it. That was done on the floor, striking all of the material of the bill from after the enacting clause and inserting in Medicaid expansion, which, boy, that's great. I like that. I voted for it. Same thing, this occurred, I believe, maybe not on the floor, but in conference committee, regarding the foster care task force. The Child Welfare Task Force is what I think it ended up finally being called after a lot of time worked out. So that also put forth through the gut and go. So oftentimes when we talk about transparency measures like putting people's names on bills or getting rid of the gut and go, I have been told that actually transparency measures make it harder for the minority because it takes away tools. So for instance, if someone's name is on a bill and they're a Democrat, then chances are that some people might look and say, oh, well, that's a Democrat bill, then we'll just bury it, or we won't vote for it, or we won't sponsor it, or co-sponsor it. So, and I've also been told, oh, well, without the gut and go, once something gets to the floor, that might be our only chance. I sort of describe the gut and go as the Hail Mary. Or, I would like to put it this way, though, is that if you're a really good cook, you don't need anything fancy. You don't even need the Instapot. The only thing you need is a cast iron skillet and a wooden spoon, and you can make a great meal. So when you have people telling you, oh, we need these tools in order to put forth good legislation, that's a bit of a red flag, because a good legislator, a good negotiator, no matter how much the odds are stacked against them, will be able to filter their way through difficult situations and will be able to work within the constructs that are set up. And so, it is incumbent upon us as legislators to set up moral constructs that leave things the most open to constituents, and then we should be the ones doing the work. Right now it's set up where it's super easy for us and super hard for you, and you guys are paying for it, so it should be the opposite. It should be very easy and convenient for all of you and difficult for us. And so that's the philosophy that I tend to operate by. So that's the way I look at it.
Is there any action to change that?
Yes, there is. There is a bill that was put forth to eliminate gut and goes, and so that is still alive. There is a bill that is still alive, and when I say alive, a lot of times bills just kind of die and are no longer able to be moved through after turnaround. These bills, several transparency bills that I think Brandy will tell you about in just a bit, were given a blessing, which means they were pulled out of non-exempt committees and put into exempt committees, which means they were kind of given a second life, zombie bills, if you will, but in a good way. But I have concerns, and this is primarily because of the gut and go. These are all transparency-related bills, and as such, if leadership or if anyone else looks at this, those bills are germane to transparency-related issues and thus are highly vulnerable for a gut and go. Seriously. So that could happen, and in a bizarre twist of irony, we could see transparency bills either bundled together or gutted. So that's fun. The legislature's great. I don't understand why you guys don't show up with torches. But thank you for not doing that. So that's sort of, I hope that I helped explain that.
So with that, Mainstream runs a tight ship here, and I'm getting texts telling me to shut it down. So, so it's my pleasure to introduce to you Brandy Fisher, the Executive Director of Mainstream Coalition.
Well, first I want to thank you all for coming tonight, spending your evening here on a Thursday night, for being active and engaged, and for pushing for more transparency. I want to thank our awesome moderator, Davis, and our fantastic panel, and our co-sponsor, Indivisible KC, for raising our game and for the awesome live feed on Twitter. So I'm barely using the right word, so you can tell that's not my platform. And our staff, Danny and Lisa, and I have a couple board members here, Ed on the panel, and Mary Sinclair. Did I miss anyone else? In addition to Representative Clayton, and she introduced Representative Stogstill. So we have two great legislators here in Johnson County. Are there any other elected officials here tonight?
Cindy came in.
Oh, Cindy Holscher, you want to stand up? And Representative Holscher. Thank you. One of our county commissioners. Thanks for being here. Great, thank you. So Janice McIntyre with Kansas Community College Board of Trustees. Great, did everyone hear her? Angelina Lawson, Board of Trustees at Johnson County Community College. Awesome, great. Did I miss anyone else? We try to always have a moment here to introduce our legislators and other electeds, but also to introduce candidates that are running. So if you're a candidate that's running and you're in the room, if you want to just stand up and say your name and the position, we are trying to run a tight ship, and it's, I think, past 8:30, but I do want to give you a chance to say hello.
Hi, Sharice Davids, just entered the 3rd District, guys.
Hello, I'm Jay Sadie. I'm running the 3rd District as well. I think transparency is a huge issue, and one of the things I push out when I talk to people in my district, a lot of people assume things about politicians because things aren't very transparent. But the thing I try to recommend people is look at their voting record. I talked to the Johnson County Junior League, and most of the women there were pretty Republican until I talked to them about Kevin's voting record. So voting record and where they get their money, and that tells you all you need to know.
Thanks. Did I miss anyone else? So one other, okay.
My name is Brandon James. I'm a candidate for Statehouse in District 86 in Wichita.
You get 4 words for driving the farthest, so thanks for being here. Something we say at Mainstream Coalition is vote, do more than vote. Thank you for being here, for being engaged. You have postcards on your chair, so I encourage each of you to stay a minute afterwards and fill out those postcards. Representative Clayton sent me a list of, I think, 7 transparency bills that are in various stages of needing to be worked or needing a hearing. And because we're here after 8:30, we will send everyone that's here that signed up a list of those bills, and so that you can see them. But in the meantime, short and sweet, take your postcard, write to your legislator and to the House leadership. So Representative Reitman, Representative Heineman, 1 card for each. So 1 card for Representative Reitman, 1 card for Representative Heineman. It's at the bottom of the agenda. And 1 card to your House legislator, and ask them to support legislation that will further transparency in the State House. It can be short and sweet. We are going to deliver them. We delivered 1,600 postcards this week on gun legislation. Many of you filled out some of those postcards. Thank you for that. So fill them out, leave them here. If you would like to go to Topeka and see a little bit of the sausage making, let us know at the front desk, let Lisa know, and we will help find a time to take you up there so you can see Davis and others in action. I feel like there's one other thing. Ed mentioned getting out the vote, and we're really excited to be partnering with a dozen organizations around the state to do a deeper push in voter engagement and getting out the vote this August and this November. If you represent an organization that might be a part, and this could be your church or synagogue, a PTA, neighborhood group, a small grassroots coffee group of friends that meet every Saturday, stop and talk to me or someone else from Mainstream, because we want to plug you into this effort. So stop us afterwards. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to Indivisible, and yeah, Bev.
Yeah, can we mention the Fish versus Kobach trial that will happen on March 6th at 9:30? Tuesday, March 6th at 9:30. So please, when you get the opportunity to show.
Full courthouse in ACK.
Can I make a quick comment about that? Just because by the way, you cannot bring any electronics into the courthouse, and you'll have to walk from far away. I learned that the hard way. Leave your cell phone in your car if you're going to come to the courthouse.
And on that big sell, there, Davis. See some of you then maybe next week, Tuesday, and at a future event. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you.